Okay, we are unmuted.
Great.
We are still getting a little bit situated here.
But we do have a quorum.
Perfect. Where do we have Hayward City Hall on camera?
Member Roche, her camera is turned off, and I'm not sure if we'll see when she joins us if Member Marquez is with her.
Okay, so should we hold off to see if they're actually present? Go ahead and start the meeting and do the roll. I don't want to start the roll call without.
I guess we should wait for Member Roche, maybe a minute for Member Roche to turn her camera on.
Okay.
Member Roche, can you hear us?
Chair Balch, can you hear us? Thumbs up. Thumbs up. Great.
I mean, there we go.
Okay, great.
Right. So we do have a quorum. Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon. The time is 3:01, and I would like to call the Ava Community Energy Executive Committee meeting to order for today. It is Wednesday, June 4th, 2025. We are located here at 1999 Harrison Street, Suite 2300 in Oakland, and there are two remote locations as noticed on our agenda. The first is Hayward City Hall, located at 777 B Street, Hayward, California 94541. And the second remote location is at the City of Pleasanton, the council office at 123 Main Street, Pleasanton, California 94566. So we should, let me say before we move on to the roll call, members of the public wishing to make a comment can either do so by raising a hand if you're here presently in our room, or if you're participating remotely, you can use the raised hand function in Zoom or *9 if you're joining through the telephone. So clerk, can you please take a roll call?
Great, thank you very much. Alameda County.
Present.
Hayward.
Present.
Stockton. Pleasanton. My apologies. Like, we cannot hear you. There's we do not have volume.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
Still muted for some reason.
And our volume is turned down as well.
Yeah, we'll just turn that up so much.
Okay, so right now we are in the midst of our roll call vote, and we got about halfway through.
We will. Okay.
Not a vote. Roll call.
San Leandro
Present.
and Piedmont.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Okay. We
And
have.
testing, can you hear me now?
Oh yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we are moving on to. So that was our first agenda item. Moving on to our second agenda item, which is public comments. Public comment is reserved for members of the public wishing to give a comment on non-agendized items. Members of the public will have 2 minutes to give their comment. Clerk, do we have members of the public wishing to make a comment on a non-agenda item at this time?
There are no hands raised at this time.
And I do not see any members of the public here with us physically, so I will go ahead and close public comments. And we will move on to our third agenda item, which is approval of the minutes from May 7th, 2025. Have my colleagues had a chance to review those minutes, and do we have any questions or corrections at this time? Seeing none, I will entertain, go ahead. Chair Balch.
I'll move the minutes.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, great. Moved by Chair Balch, seconded by Executive Committee Vice Chair Gonzalez. Now, if there's any other comments, seeing none, we're going to proceed with our vote. Roll call vote.
Thank you. Alameda County.
Aye.
Hayward.
Aye.
Pleasanton.
Aye.
San Leandro.
Aye.
Piedmont.
Aye.
Minutes are approved.
The minutes are approved unanimously, and we are moving on to draft agenda item number 4, which is draft AVA budget for fiscal year 2025-26. This is the first of 2 informational items that we will be reviewing today, so I will try to keep us on track. I'm not quite sure. I'm looking right now at our CEO.
We'll be able
If
to
you
get
would-
both in sufficiently. I think.
Okay, that's what I was gonna say. Do you want me to call time at some point to move on to the second item, but you'll let me know when that is
Yeah.
if we need to move on. Okay, so at this point in time, I am turning it over to our CEO, Howard Chang.
Great. I think we'll tentatively plan to use roughly half the time for each of these items.
Great.
We have, of course, reviewed the budget throughout May at XCOM, FAP, and the full board. So this is an update. I'm not going to walk through every detail of the budget, given that it has been previously reviewed, but I'll really highlight what has changed, and there are some meaningful changes that have occurred. So you can go to the next slide, Adrian. This is a really quick summary of those changes. So we had been talking about an anticipated action by the CPUC to reform PCIA. Sure enough, as of Friday, May 23rd, they did file a proposed decision that proposes to reform PCIA really in line with what we had modeled. So no huge surprises there. And with that, we anticipate that they will vote that out on June 23rd.
Howard, sorry to interrupt you, but could you speak clear into the microphone a little closer?
Yes, if I knew.
This one?
Sorry, thank you.
I'll try to, let me know if I am speaking clearly now. I was also maybe covering my mouth a little bit. Am I coming through clearly now?
Better. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. So as I just noted, CPUC did file a proposed decision on May 23rd. They're expected to vote that out on June 23rd. Ava is certainly preparing to file comments in response to that. And as already noted previously, there was an error filing on May 15th, so that was just prior to the June board meeting. That filing actually included outdated market price benchmarks. So those market price benchmarks were as of end of 2024, so certainly did not incorporate anything related to the proposed decision that was filed. And given market volatility, those numbers are a little bit stale, so I just wanted to note that. In this budget presentation, we continue to forecast two scenarios. We previously had two scenarios. One was with PCI reform, one was without. Now, of course, we have fully incorporated the PCI reform assumptions, but we do continue to maintain two scenarios. Both have PCI reform. One includes our forecast of market prices, and one includes what is publicly filed in terms of market price benchmarks and market assumptions, which are higher. And we'll see the sort of implications of those two scenarios in the following slides. Next slide, Adrian. Our proposed recommendation to the board will be to approve the base case scenario, which is our best estimate of market prices, and it is a more conservative scenario. It also includes implementing the compliance period procurement methodology. That is something that we touched on in the previous draft budget review. And in light of the PCI reform moving forward, we are incorporating some cost savings related to implementing that compliance period procurement methodology. And the last point is, because we are running a deficit in the scenario that we are looking at, we are proposing utilization of our rate stabilization fund to offset some of that. It will also assume that we're going to put some more towards our rate stabilization fund from our current fiscal year, though we're certainly not asking for action on that today. All right, moving forward, Adrian, you can go to slide 5. Nothing new here. As I noted, the proposed decision was filed on May 23rd. There's a little typo. It's not June 26th that'll get voted out. It's June 23rd. There's a link to the proposed decision for reference there. Next slide, Adrian. This is just a summary of what the proposed decision encapsulates. The gist of it is that these changes basically will inherently lower the resource adequacy related market price benchmarks. The implication of that is that PCIA increases and rates will generally decrease, just directionally speaking. We can go to the next slide. This is the same slide that we've seen before, but it is worth just re-highlighting. Based off of the PCI reform aspects, we are anticipating, this is our estimate of basically collection in 2026, or over collection in 2025 and basically a true up for that in 2026 of $187 million. That's for calendar year 26. So a portion of that will be trued up in the back half of this next fiscal year. So that would be January through June of 2026. And of course, a portion of that will be in the fiscal year beyond that, the 26 to 27 fiscal year. And this table just breaks down what that is quarter to quarter. It's about $187 million. So it is a pretty material change as a result of this PCI reform. And more of that is actually on the latter half. So it'll actually hit in the 26, 27 fiscal year. Next slide, Adrian. This is a slide that we showed before as well, but what I will highlight here is just that there has been considerable volatility in the market. We are starting to see softening in prices for some of these energy-related products. And the last point I'll just make is if you look between the dark blue bars and the light blue bars, the dark blue bars are forecasted market price benchmarks. So as you go into a calendar year, rates are always based off of a forecast. And then towards the end of that calendar year, you do a true up based off of actuals. So the light blue bar is what's noted as final. Those are actuals. And you can see the difference between final and forecast is pretty different. And that just goes to speak to the volatility that you see in the market just within 12 months, right? You go into a year, you forecast something, less than 12 months later, you look at actuals and they're considerably different. So as much as we try to forecast our numbers here, part of the reason why we do continue to include two scenarios is because there is, I can feel confident in saying that the end result will not be exactly what we forecast because we will see volatility in the market. Okay, now let's get to the actual budget. You can go to the next slide 10, Adrian. So this breaks down some of the historical rates. We showed these graphs before, but these are updated now to account for PCI reform in both of these scenarios, and it incorporates sort of a base case and an upside. So in the table in the graph in the bottom left, just to be clear, that is fiscal years. So that's our fiscal year cycle from July 1 through June 30th. And then the table to the right, the graph to the right is calendar year. And so most of this is showing historicals, of course. And the last two bars on each of these graphs is showing our 2026 forecast. U denotes upside, B denotes base case. Our base case really is our core scenario that we anticipate. The key difference there is some of the market price benchmark assumptions that we've made. So in both cases, we do assume significantly lower resource adequacy pricing as is sort of implicated by the PCI reform. But there are differences in the RPS, so the renewable energy related MPBs or market price benchmarks that we assume in each of those scenarios. I'll point us to the bottom right in particular, those last two bar charts. I know it's a little bit of an eye test here, but what's really notable is rates are going down as a whole, right, from what have been historically high levels the last few years, and they're kind of returning back into that 2019, 2020, 2021 levels. And obviously the pink portion, which is PCIA, is increasing significantly. That's an expected dynamic. As rates go down, PCIA naturally goes up as a proportion. Green is our operating expenses, and you can see our margin, of course, is basically the blue bar, the blue portion of the bar minus the green line. And so you can see that's dipping negative in 2026 considerably in both scenarios, certainly more dramatically in the base case scenario. And again, the reason why the base case scenario is even lower than the upside scenario is because we've assumed some softer energy prices, which is what we are estimating just based off of what we're seeing in the market. The upside scenario is based off of some staler but publicly filed numbers that have some higher energy prices. So I think we have reason to believe that the base case is more likely. But as I highlighted in the last slide, there's a lot of market volatility. You can't really forecast these prices. You can be sure that things will actualize a little differently. And so the upside reflects some of that. You can see on the left side, of course, it's a bit more muted because it is a fiscal year. So it is blending 25 and 26. And you can see in the upside scenario, it's a little bit positive, and in the base case scenario, it's a little negative. So that's what we're looking at. Next slide, Adrian. So these are the numbers. These are the numbers for our budget. The two columns to the left are our current fiscal year budget and actuals, and those numbers did not change from our prior presentation. The actuals column is what I'll just focus attention on there. We are looking at a very strong surplus for this current fiscal year that's ending June 30th of over $113 million. And then, of course, the two columns to the right, those are new numbers. The big changes are in the operating revenue because of the PCI reform and the updated market prices that we're assuming. That has lowered the operating revenue forecast that we have in both of these scenarios. And the end result of that, of course, total net revenues, or really our net position, you can see our base case is running a meaningful deficit at $42 million, and our upside is positive $20 million. So those are significant updates from our prior draft form. I will say we'll talk through some actions that we want to take in light of this, but my quick commentary is $42 million. A deficit of $42 million is certainly material and some reason for concern. We take this very seriously. On the other hand, when you look at our surplus for this current fiscal year of over $113 million, these things balance out year to year, of course. We are, based off of the commentary from the PCI reform, it is a view that we are over collecting this year, and therefore we should give that back next year. So these things do balance out. So while, of course, this is reason for pause and concern, it's not any reason to panic, because we do have a healthy surplus here. We have $330 million in reserves. We have very ample cash and working capital, so we can weather this. And when we do look at, one thing I'll call on, actually go back one slide, Adrian, is what's really important from a risk management perspective to highlight is when we were back in 2019, 2020, 21 in lower priced environments, when prices started to increase in 22, 23, 24, our financials look really strong for two reasons. One is that as prices go up, rates go up, PCI goes down, that gets us more financial operating headroom, as we've talked about. And it's also important to recognize that we've built a portfolio in a lower priced environment. So we have a lot of in the money energy hedges. And we always knew when prices go down, and we expected prices to go down as things are cyclical, you're going to get compressed in that headroom because rates go down and PCI goes up. But also we've been putting on energy hedges in high priced environments. And therefore we've got a lot of out of the money hedges going into these more compressed operating headroom. That was known. That's why we put a lot into reserves and built up a healthy balance sheet in light of that. So again, this was anticipated. You never can predict exactly when that will happen, but you certainly can rest assured markets cycle through and that we were going to see prices soften up from what were historically high levels. So now we are experiencing that. I think we're well prepared for that. That's not to say we don't have to take some specific actions to, of course, address those concerns and deficits. Okay, Adrian, let's move on to slide. I'm going to skip slide 12, which really is, there's no change from prior draft. So go to slide 13. The numbers to the right, we have intentionally not updated. We need to work through more modeling to look forward, more forward-looking beyond this fiscal year. If you recall previously, those were more concerning numbers. We want to continue to model those, and we've kind of left that there just for context. The section to the left, of course, is talking about various levers and tools we have to manage a deficit. What we have highlighted there, so you can kind of see bolded, the 4 sub-bullets to the bottom are what we've incorporated into this budget. What we have not highlighted there is adjustments to the customer value proposition. So we are not proposing any changes there. We heard feedback from the board meetings in May. We don't take those lightly. So we have not included any changes associated with those, but we have included an adjustment to renewable energy and large hydro procurement targets by implementing the compliance period methodology. We have incorporated adjustments to local development funding and personnel hiring. Those are the same changes we had in the prior version. And then the last one is that we are assuming that we're going to utilize our rate stabilization fund to offset the deficit. So that was something that we assumed. Okay, next slide, Adrian. This is the same setup that we had before, just to present options for adjusting our value proposition. These numbers did change a little bit because when your rate projections change, your revenue projections change. Obviously, if you were to change the value proposition, these numbers get tweaked a little bit. But in order of magnitude wise, if you were to adjust your Bright Choice by 1% and your Renewable 100 premium by $0.25 cents, it adds up to about $12 to $13 million over the course of the fiscal year. Again, we're not recommending any changes to this, though we would propose revisiting this in the mid-year as we get rates set and finalized. We'll be in a better position to really understand what are the implications of that from a budget perspective, and certainly would want to reconsider any adjustments to the value proposition if necessary. So we would plan to bring that forward in the December timeframe for consideration if needed. Next slide, Adrian. Slide 15 now starts to talk about compliance period procurement methodology. So the next couple of slides are on this topic. I would say this is a meaningful topic and a meaningful update from the last presentation. The table to the bottom left is the very recently finalized 2024 power content label that has our power content label next to PG&E's power content label. You can see obviously we have Bright Choice and Renewable 100 broken out, and you can see PG&E's numbers there. This is finalized and will be mailed out very shortly, if not already, quite frankly. But we're near finalized at least. So for the PG&E numbers, you can see their renewable levels at 23% relative to our Bright Choice level at about 62%. Their large hydros at 12%, and you can see ours is about 34%. Of course, nuclear is a very large percentage. They're at 63%. Ours for 2024, as a reminder, is only 0.5%. That's coming through some of very immaterial amounts that are coming through other supply agreements. The nuclear allocation that we've accepted, that will ripple through for 2025. So that does not hit in 2024, which is why that number is so low. Certainly for 25, we expect PG&E's numbers to change considerably. We expect that nuclear number to come down significantly. I would anticipate their natural gas levels to increase in response to that. It is hard to predict where their renewable and large hydro will come out. Large hydro typically doesn't change too much, mostly driven by the water year, whether it's a drought or it's a wet year. The renewable number is, however, does change a lot. 23% is one of their lowest renewable energy years, at least for the last 5 years or so. It is, I believe that's actually below technically the annual compliance obligation. I highlight that, though, that they have a lot of banked RECs. So they're using RECs from other years to satisfy their compliance obligation for 2024, which is something that's fully allowed under the RPS legislation. And I highlight that importantly as it relates to our consideration of a compliance period procurement methodology, because you can see they utilize that. They do that already. And I think what we're proposing here is that we allow ourselves to do something similar on our voluntary procurements, to allow ourselves to balance out year to year our procurement levels in a similar manner that PG&E does, as is allowed under the RPS standards. And you can see here, obviously, the level of kind of volatility that they experience as it relates to that. Next slide, Adrian. So this is a little bit more illustrative in terms of what would be the implication of us incorporating that into our power procurement methodologies. The bottom right graph is simply that actually is what I know it's a little bit difficult to read, but the different colored shadings are different compliance periods that are established by RPS. So RPS, as I've noted, they allow for compliance period of across 2, 3, or 4 years. And so that is a breakout of what those are and how it increases over time to get towards 100%. The table to the bottom left, those are our own targets. And I've slimmed this down from what was presented last month. That first line in the table shows our target procurements. It's board adjusted because year to year we've made various adjustments. So this is the latest target levels that have been board approved. Below that, you can see actuals. Obviously, the actuals run through 2024. We don't have that for 25 or 26 yet, of course. And then you can see below that is what is the over or under procurement. Historically, we have always had an over procurement, and that has increased over time. I'll highlight that has occurred in 2023 and 24, mostly because we have a lot of as generated contracts. So as we get more of our solar and wind projects online where we've signed long-term power purchase agreements, those contracts are as delivered, as generated contracts. When we launched in 2018, 19, 2021, we had a lot of short-term contracts that were for existing resources. And so what that means is we're buying firm contracts from parties that have mature projects that know what they have to sell. And so the over procurement is a lot smaller. We've had more and more projects come along. That's all a good thing. Obviously, these are incremental renewable energy projects that we are causing to be built of late. And as a result of that, those volumes are far less predictable. One, because they're just new projects. And typically when you get a new project online, you go through a commissioning process, you're still tweaking the project itself. They tend to under deliver and you plan for lower volumes. So that's, and so some of those projects have generated more than what we conservatively assume because they're new projects. And so that's why you tend to that's why we have over procured in that regard. It's also because we have had a intentionally conservative methodology where we assume lower volumes delivered. And we've done that because we do not want to under procure. We have not had a compliance period methodology. So we don't want to take the risk of being below our targets. We know these are important targets for our board and our community. So we've been made at a point to use conservative assumptions where we may have minimum contractual obligations by the seller, but an ability to deliver more. Well, sure enough, they deliver more, but we estimated our procurement levels based off of these more conservative levels. So that's why that over procurement has increased. And certainly the other point is just 23, 24 have been very healthy financial years. And so years like that, we generally want to err on the side of procuring a little bit more, given the importance of decarbonization for our agency. So that's the reason why we've over procured. If we incorporate a compliance period procurement methodology, you can see how that could play through for 25 and 26. I want to be clear. We've over procured in 24. The idea is that we would therefore procure a little below our board adjusted target procurements for 25 and 26. Those are all set at 81%. And so if you were to just evenly divide that over procurement over 25 and 26, you could under procure by 7.5% each year. You'd be about 73.5% as a result of that. So that's how that sort of balance out over a 3-year period. This is one proposal. Certainly there's different tweaks to this. You could say, do we want to use a 4-year period? Do we want to exclude 24? Do we want to include 23? So there's a lot of different flavors and approaches here. We've assumed for purposes of this budget, it's a 24, 25, 26 compliance period. We're using the over procurement in 24 to help balance out our 25 and 26 years. Our intention is in July, we'll bring forward some more scenarios and considerations and policy on what we might want to implement from a compliance period perspective. We'll also talk a little bit about the 24/7 emissions accounting methodology changes that are on the horizon that are anticipated in the 27-28 timeframe. So certainly that has some level of implication here. It's probably going to lead to more conversation in the future before we can truly finalize all these things, because that is a bigger change on the 24/7 emissions accounting methodology that will likely have some bigger implications on our procurement targets as a whole. But I don't want to unpack that issue entirely, certainly not today, and it's probably not even going to occur in July. But I want to start to have that engagement and that discussion. For today's purpose on the budget, we're just presenting one scenario on compliance period methodology, and want to get some feedback there. So we have assumed some savings here of $10 to $16 million in our energy expenses by incorporating this. So that's already included to help manage that deficit to $42 million. It would have been something larger if we hadn't included this. Okay. next slide, Adrian, and this will probably be the last slide I'm really going to cover in detail. So this is the rate stabilization fund. This accounting on the right is something we already presented before. I just want to reiterate, we have a GASB 62 revenue deferral fund already. We've had that passed by resolution back in 2020. And we have certain funds there that are for very specific purposes. One purpose is for rate stabilization. We have about $32 million in there already for that purpose. That's not enough to cover our $42 million deficit, obviously. I would anticipate a recommendation that we'll want to allocate a portion, a significant portion, if not all, of our over $110 million budget surplus that we're forecasting from this year to go into a rate stabilization fund. I'm not asking for action for that now or even at the June board meeting, but I anticipate that we will seek to do that. We'll want to do that in the July and September timeframe. We'll do that in conjunction with presenting some other details around a rate stabilization fund policy. And we'll also do that in conjunction with, as we're doing our financial audit, to better understand exactly how those numbers are getting finalized and actualized. Then we'll bring forward an item to the board, first for an informational item and then for an action item for approval to make any potential changes to how we allocate that budget surplus. Because if we do put it into the rate stabilization fund, it is a change from what was board approved previously with the budget. So I don't take that lightly. This would more or less be the first time that we're making such a material change. So would want to ensure adequate review and discussion of that. But that is a flag that is what I would anticipate and expect. Further slides are largely unchanged. We did include the local development slides in there. So Adrian, you could just jump to slide 23, which is just sort of next steps to wrap up here. So we're going to bring this, of course, to the June 18th full board for an action item. I am expecting at this stage no further material changes to what we've laid out here, whereas previously, obviously, we knew the proposed decision and such were on the horizon. This has now incorporated what I would expect to be the latest and greatest information, of course, barring any feedback from the body here to make any changes. And one last summary is just the recommendation here is to approve the budget based on the base case scenario. That's the more conservative scenario. And with that, that incorporates the compliance period procurement methodology that we've outlined. And then assuming we're using the rate stabilization fund to offset any potential deficit that occurs. Stop there.
Okay, great. So this is an informational item. I'm imagining that my colleagues have some questions to ask, and then we'll turn to public comment and see if we have any members of the public who want to weigh in on this informational item, and then we'll bring it back for comments. So at this point in time, are there any? I see lots of hands raised. Oh my goodness. So I think well, let's start with seniority. Let's start with member. Yeah, right. Member Marquez.
I actually don't have any questions. It's Member Roche, but thank you.
Oh, well.
You want to skip over to Jackie?
No, that's all right.
I just wanted to be clear. So the budget that we're looking to adopt in June is a $41 million deficit.
That is correct. Well,
Okay, but
it's a $41 million deficit. Technically, I would seek feedback here to utilize the rate stabilization fund. So the budget we would present would be utilization of a rate stabilization fund to offset that deficit. So we would actually be neutral.
okay, so that is a question we have to ask for the June 18th, whatever it is, that adoption, right?
Yeah.
And are you looking for feedback from us on doing that now?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I sort of accept your recommendation on that. I just wanted to be clear about what that recommendation was. Okay. Thank you. That's actually all. Thank you for all the, yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, you thought,
No, I'm done.
Sure. I don't think we've ever had to tap into any type of reserve fund. Is this the first time, correct?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay, and it's 41 million is the total?
Yes, it's 42, 41 and change. So roughly 41.9.
Okay. And should things change in the future, obviously we have a policy around replenishing that account, so that it will always remain an opportunity.
Absolutely, and that will be part of a future item where we want to talk a little bit more about sort of longer term funding plans as it relates to reserves, rate stabilization fund, and we've never really established a long-term funding plan, but we'd want to do that, of course. That was something that we were planning on as is in light of the deficit. Certainly this year, I wouldn't anticipate we'll have significant funds, but with that said, you know, the numbers will actualize a little different. So the deficit could be a little bit larger and we may have to tap into more of the rate stabilization fund. And alternatively, prices may actualize differently where our financials are better and could even be positive, in which case I would, it's a good point, I'll formalize a recommendation here that to the extent there is a positive net position to have that actually go into the rate stabilization fund as well.
Replenish that. Okay, and then last question, sorry. I thought I didn't have questions, but things are coming to me now. In terms of the power content label, what is the legal requirement? Is that a separate notice that goes to every account? Or does that get coupled with billing? I just want to be clear on what are the legal requirements about providing that information to the public.
There is a separate notification mailer requirement that we have as it relates to the power content label and the joint rate mailer. Maybe I'll let Annie speak to the specifics there. If you want
So there's multiple compliance notification requirements. The first is due by July 1, and it's called the joint rate mailer. So it compares our rates to PG&E, but then it also has a comparison of the not yet approved by the CEC, but our power content compared to PG&E, and then the power content label, which is due by the end of the calendar year, that compares our power content to the state average.
So what are we doing to ensure that people are understanding that on our website? Just because people lose information they're not tracking, is there a way that that information is housed on our website? So if people have questions, concerns, it's a quick, easy visit our website.
Correct. They are both posted on our website. This information that Howard just presented on the 2024 power content, I mean, I think PG&E submitted it on Monday. We submitted it on Friday. So that is not yet posted to the site because it hasn't gone through the process yet.
Okay, but it will eventually.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions. Okay. Now we're turning to Board Chair Balch.
Yeah, thank you. I apologize. The audio was going in and out, so you may have covered these things, Howard. I think it's my side, by the way, so I do apologize. So I'm going to go to slide 13. Interesting number choice, right? This is the long term. This is what people saw. And, you know, when we look a little further out, right, in our forecasting, and maybe we saw, you know, 27, 28 or so, but you know, it was a significant drop, right? So my question for staff is, I get using the rate stabilization fund, but help me understand if that's just a one-time fix or operationally, if we need to start making some other things or changes now so that we can be prepared for bigger impacts later on that might be more egregious or difficult to overcome.
Yeah, a couple ways to answer that. One is I'll start by saying that forecast on the right is intentionally left there and intentionally sort of blocked because I recognize, of course, we've modeled some scenarios where there's some more concerning numbers on the horizon, and what I'll share is just the latest is just we are still working through updating the modeling with the latest information in terms of market prices, in terms of the PCI reform. And there's a lot of underlying modeling assumptions that came out of the ERA filing, just for your awareness. So there's a lot to incorporate from a modeling perspective to think about what are the implications on a longer term horizon. So that's why we haven't provided a more formalized updated model there. And I would caution us to rely on those numbers. And so that's why I want to defer on that. And I also want to defer on any more meaningful structural changes to rates or value proposition in light of, in the absence of a clearer picture of what longer term financial forecasts look like. With that said, if we did run a significant deficit going beyond this next fiscal year, going into the 26-27 fiscal year, we would want to consider some changes. And we would also continue to utilize things like a rate stabilization fund and our reserve fund to help manage through that type of deficit. That's more meaningful if it's longer term. Obviously, we have to be very conscious of that and consider some structural changes with that. What I wanted to highlight there is the rate stabilization fund and the reserve fund are healthier funds that you can still continue to use. So they're not one time and we're out. There's ample liquidity of $330 million in our reserve fund. And if we were to put our entire surplus into rate stabilization fund, we would still have about $100 million in the rate stabilization fund for future purposes as well. So it's not a one-time use and then it's gone. But of course, we want to be very prudent with how quickly we would utilize something like that. And if we were to continue to forecast meaningful deficit beyond this, that's part of where I would expect we would revisit value proposition approaching the mid-year and potentially even some other changes to the extent we could make them. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna I hear what you're saying. So here's my question of staff, right? How far out do you project for the entity? How far does Ava project out? Because we have theoretically time on our hands now. So, I got to be careful because we're in the question period, but how far out as an organization, how far out do we project, forecast as an organization? How much have we institutionalized to forecast out? How many years out?
Yeah, so we've done 10-year forecasts. I wouldn't say our 10-year forecast right now bakes in all of the intricacies that have just been released over the course of last month.
Of course not, right?
That's
Yeah.
why I'm kind of held on providing a formalized additional forward-looking forecast, but we've done that, and that's what we're going to do here in the relatively near term. The other piece I would just layer on there that's really important for consideration is I know that there is some reasonable concern to say, what is our financial forecast look like in the 26, 27, 28 timeframe? And the balance there is when you look at that historical graph is as prices soften, our energy costs go down. And so if it's a blip of a year, there's a different implication than a sustained moderation of prices. And so that's the intricacy and some of the complexity with a long-term forecast is obviously we can forecast rates based off of certain energy market assumptions, and that's balanced out with our energy expenses also interplay with that, of course, and go down in light of rates going down. There's just a catch-up period that we need to work through that usually takes a 2-3 year time frame.
Okay, let me ask a different way on it. If we wanted to have a $20 million deficit for rate stabilization instead of 40, right? What are some options that staff may recommend? And I know I'm asking this without any help to you, so I know it'd be off the cuff. I'm not trying to hold him to you, but what levers do we have available?
Yeah, I would go back to the levers that we've already laid out and continue to lean into those levers. So there's that same slide that has the sort of 5 options. Adjustments to value proposition, we could make that at the start of the fiscal year as opposed to considering it at mid-year. We can make adjustments for procurement targets. We have assumed 7 new personnel hirings. We could cut that 7 down. We could make adjustments to our local development funding. We have currently assumed roughly $10 million going into local development funding for the year. And what was the last item? I don't want to, and just use of rate stabilization. So that's not really an option for managing that deficit to a lower level at the outset. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to stop with the questions, but I do have comments when it comes back around.
Great, okay, thank you so much. Okay, in the room, do we have?
I'm going to pass.
You're going to pass, okay. I have some questions. So I'm curious, we were talking about rate stabilization fund versus kind of the reserve funds. Could you maybe explain what the difference is and when would we use one versus the other?
Yeah, this is a part of what we'd like to formalize a little bit more on the rate stabilization fund policy. We have a rate stabilization fund that's approved by board resolution. We don't have a firm policy target of what we want to have in that fund, and so that's something for future consideration. All of that is to say there's just a little bit more detail that we can formalize there. But the reserve fund requires board action. The analogy I like to use is your reserve fund's sort of your earthquake fund. You hope you don't really have to touch it. It's there for real significant catastrophe scenarios. Your rate stabilization fund is intended to be used. So call it in a 10-year period, I would anticipate we will use our rate stabilization fund over a 2 or 3 year period because of the very dynamic of that market cyclicality. And I'd also point out that this is in part based off of very specifically how we set our rates. We index to PG&E and we always want to maintain our value proposition or a discount for bright choice. Not all CCAs have made that same decision. Some have said we will lightly index. Some have said we will not index. We will set our rates independently of them. There's pros and cons to that. At times you can be more expensive than PG&E is a very important con to point out of that methodology. But if you're okay with that methodology, that sometimes you're a little bit more, sometimes you're a little less, then your rate stabilization fund may be utilized a little differently. Because you may say, you know what, I'd rather be a little bit more expensive than PG&E right now. It's just for a year, but on average, we're still more competitive. That's okay. We don't want to touch our rate stabilization fund. Our methodology obviously is very acutely indexed to PG&E, and we do not want to be more expensive than PG&E. Certainly, we can adjust that, and that is up for consideration. And of course, would require board action if we wanted to change the value proposition to lessen discount, let alone if we wanted to consider being more expensive than PG&E. But of course, those would have direct implications for when we would recommend utilizing the rate stabilization fund or not.
Okay, so just flagging that distinction might come up in the full board.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the rate stabilization fund and the reserve funds? And then on slide 15, we were talking about the content labels for 2024. And I'm curious if we should put like a little asterisk next to PG&E, because my recollection is that PG&E gets to kind of pick and choose what it's putting on these content labels. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but I remember that they lean heavily on reporting nuclear and kind of under-report other types of energy that's being utilized. So whereas I think our label, of course our label's better, the best label, that our label is fully transparent, right? Like there's no shell game happening on our labels.
Yeah, and the distinction I would draw is it's not that they have different rights than we. If we had excess energy procurement, we could technically pick and choose as well.
I see.
We don't, and they have a lot of excess procurement. They have a lot of extra natural gas that they don't disclose because they have a lot of nuclear that they can disclose. So that if you have over 100% power relative to your load, you can pick the 100% you want to disclose. There's no explicit requirement for how they disclose that. There are processes with CEC in terms of power disclosure that we've commented on to try to adjust that. None of that has moved forward formally.
Right.
So that is the case. Technically, we could do the same. We just don't have a lot of excess energy that we have relative to our load.
Okay. I just wonder if it's worth putting an asterisk or something, and I don't know the wording. Obviously, I wouldn't use my words, but just to say that this doesn't necessarily reflect all of the energy procured by PG&E. Just because it might look odd to folks looking at that slide to be like, wait, 63% of energy coming from PG&E is coming from nuclear, and I thought only 10% of the state's energy was coming from nuclear. So that's just a little.
We could do that on this slide without
Yeah.
any issues.
Okay.
We cannot do that on the compliance mailers.
No, I understand that.
Okay, yeah.
No, I understand that. I just meant for the board.
Oh,
For the-
yes, we
Okay.
can absolutely add some clarification on that.
Okay, all right. And then I had a question on page 16, this compliance period. I just wanted to kind of synthesize what I heard from you and make sure I was understanding correctly, that the over procurement in years 2023 and 2024 is actually a really good thing in that we had contracted for a certain amount of clean energy and our contracts came in with more than that. They provided more than what we had expected to receive. And so that's great if we've made investment in these energy sources and they're producing more clean energy than we expected. So I'm not really sure how to say that more succinctly, potentially when we're giving this presentation or when you're giving this presentation to the full board, but I think that's a great thing. I think that's terrific.
I'm a little confused by that though.
Okay.
So just if you can explain that again, because it seemed like we got what we contracted for. It wasn't that they over generated, right?
Well, so there's
So I'm trying to figure out.
there are a
like-
number of factors. The first factor I'll sort of explain is if we contracted, hypothetically speaking, I'll just say 100 megawatt solar project. A 100 megawatt solar project is going to generate energy within a certain band.
Yep.
Plus or minus 10-20%.
Yep.
Right. And our PPAs, our power purchase agreements, have guaranteed energy production levels. Those are at a lower level, and if they didn't meet that level, they would not be in compliance and they'd be in default of that contract. So it's a conservative number. And then, of course, they can generate easily 15% more than that because it was either a sunny year or because they've built and operated that project effectively. And so there is a reasonable range there. So in all cases, we've contracted that project. We will take everything that is generated from that project.
So then I'm actually gonna ask you to pause because maybe what I'm wondering, is it that we have, I'll pick a number, hypothetical, we have 20%, 10% of renewables that we're buying outside of a long-term contract?
We do have quite a bit.
Look, I'm just trying to figure out, if we bought 96, how are we gonna get to 73 without ourselves breaching a contract?
We still have considerable short-term contracts as well. So yeah, those are things that we wouldn't continue.
We wouldn't necessarily take from or draw from.
Yeah, that's right. And we have increasing load. So we have different open positions looking out in 25, 26. Some of this is, project came online. You can't pick the exact date a project comes online. You've got to, maybe it came in 6 months earlier. So we don't actually need it right now, but obviously over the course of the next 10 years, we need it. So those are the types of factors that allow us to balance. Yeah. And to be clear, we could sell it. We could have a long position. It's a liquid market. There are buyers. You could sell some of that.
Okay. Thanks so much. Those are my questions for now. Any other questions that came up during those questions? Okay. We're going to turn now to public comment. If we have any members of our online audience who have any comments they'd like to share at this time on this informational item.
There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay. I'm closing public comment, but with the caveat that we did receive the full board a letter today from Jessica Tovar of the People's Clean Power Alliance. And among many things, she was encouraging Ava Community Energy to directly advocate at the CPUC level to protect Ava's ability to offer competitive rates and prevent undue financial burdens to local communities. And what she was referring to is the PCIA discussion we had. So I guess my follow-up question would be, what are we thinking about that right now in terms of any advocacy or anything like that?
Yeah, we absolutely are. We are engaged with some of our local environmental organizations on this particular topic. And certainly we have been planning to make formal comments in the proceeding itself. And there are certainly other legal considerations that we could take to kind of push that process a little bit more as well, without going into too much detail there.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, any other questions? And if none, we will turn to executive committee member comments. And I recall that our board chair Balch had some comments he wanted to share.
Is now the right time, Chair?
Now is the right time, yes, please.
Okay, so staff, appreciate what we're trying to do here, right? We've got a lot of variables going on, a lot of direction. I'm going to assert we need to institutionalize a process to have a forecasting process. I'm going to assert that I think it's got to be, as we all know, right? Outlying years will be less precise. Closer years will be more precise with more precision. And then we need to have, as part of our budgeting process timeline, a check on how well we are able to forecast compared to actuals so that we can get some clarity. What I am worried about in light of a lot of our jurisdictions in AVA are dealing with budget shortfalls. Pleasanton is in the middle of it. It's been what I've been dealing with for, unfortunately, 6 months. So knowing how much to use the rate stabilization fund is one of the hardest challenges I have right now with this budget as presented. Not that I don't think we're doing it prudently. I think staff is, but how do I know how quick we should do that versus should we be pulling levers now, such as reducing or freezing those vacant staff positions now so that we can ensure the overall survivability of the organization and health so it can continue to deliver on its principles, on its goals, right? And so I know you've said you've got one. I know we've said we're doing it. I know we've bolstered our financial arm and team. I really appreciate, and I see them there. So I am just a bit challenged with that question and am willing to have staff maybe help me with it. How much do we use the rate stabilization versus how soon do we start making changes to how we're operationally doing things so that we can go the distance? I guess that's a discussion point. I'd like to maybe get your opinion on, Howard. While I've been watching this, I re-looked at the slides related to how much of the fund is dedicated to rate stabilization. I understand we can bolster it if we take the current year and we allocate it all to that. These are big numbers, right? And the reality is that this is a change. I don't know how egregious or significant it is, how overall it is, but I'm concerned. Not that you guys have misled us. This is definitely a very good plan. I like where we're looking at it. I just want to know is, there will be a limit where our resources will run out. And if we are not prudent now or know how far we may have to go, that's my challenge with the clarity I have at this moment. So maybe I leave it like that and get staff feedback or hear my other fellow board members here.
There is a hand raised at the Hayward site. I'm not quite sure which of our esteemed members, or maybe both, have a comment. If you want to listen to that comment, and then we'll bring it back. Okay. So
Yeah, thanks. I guess, so I hear, Jack, what you're saying, and I appreciate what you're saying. And I guess maybe I do go back to, if the rate stabilization fund was there specifically for this reason, right? So it's not sort of an average like reserve, like I would think of in our city, right? Like we're really nervous about going into a reserve. So we're absolutely looking at, vacancy, halting, filling vacancies and things. But if the rate stabilization wasn't, and since a reserve that was specifically set aside for this, I'd be a little more comfortable with that. And then as far as the levers go, like I would be really uncomfortable with changing, the customer value proposition or the local development funding, just because we do have such a healthy reserve. It would be really, I think it would be terrible for the community for us to go back and say, we're going to take it from you for a few $1 million rather than, this really, really healthy reserve that we have. And so, I would be really hesitant to adjust those, given that these are our first 2 projected years of deficit, and and that we did over procure, and that we can sort of. So I'd like to see us go through a year of deficit in a way before we changed. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't absolutely look at what the rate stabilization policy is, right? That I feel is different. Like, is that a one-time thing? Is that a constant? Is that a move from the reserve into rate stabilization? But I wouldn't want us to pull the other levers to sort of enter into our first year of deficit until we got to a mid-year and understood more clearly what our actuals look like. That's all. Thank you. Those are my comments on that.
Okay. Vice Chair.
I agree with both of them. Look, I am obviously fiscally conservative, and so what board chair is talking about is absolutely, I think, something you can never lose track of. We don't have to have a huge public discussion about something that might happen 18 months from now, but I am assuming that it's on your mind already, right? That it's on your radar, it's something you're thinking about. I'm also one to recognize that these things fluctuate, and so I'm not kind of too panicked about 1 year. I do think that we need to have clear guidance around how we use the rate stabilization fund. I don't really understand when it was set up, how it was set up, for exactly what purpose. So I think that needs to be fleshed out. I've got some bigger picture questions that are really far outside of the purpose of this meeting. I will say the one lever that I didn't hear and maybe it was there and I just missed it, and I apologize if I did. Because we're running a negative margin, the more we sell, the more we lose. Speed to implement new territories or elements of new territories, I didn't hear as one of the levers. So if something is delayed by 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, whatever it is, every little bit of delay on its face is economically superior. So just, I'll toss that out there for whatever it's worth. This is informational, right? So in the end, just recognize that I support going forward with what we have here, with the various, concerns being expressed for the benefit of the executive team at AVA. But I don't see a reason to stop doing what we have proposed, or what we received as a proposal from staff.
Great, thank you. The only thing I would add is I agree with the board chair in terms of just trying to look ahead a little bit farther than 2 years. But I also appreciate that the agency's only been in existence for 8 years? And the rules keep changing, the prices are extremely volatile. So, I mean, just even in this budget, we have a potential anticipated swing of $62 million. So I could see that it would be very, very hard to do a 10-year plan, given all of those variables. But I am, in agreement that a longer term, with variables baked that this could best case scenario going forward, worst case scenario. I don't know that we need to go out 10 years, but it would be helpful framing for the board if there is any ability to do that. And I am open-minded enough to know that staff may come back and say that is an impossible task. But I agree that if it is possible, it would be very, very helpful to the board to see potential longer term trends and where we might be headed. So I see that our board chair has his hand up again. Please.
Thank you. Yeah, I love this group because we see it, we understand we're contributing. So I want to maybe express that. I didn't want to come out so hard that I was saying we're cutting everything. I apologize if it came across like that. What I'm trying to make sure doesn't happen is that if we are in a deficit year 2 and year 3, we're not sitting here saying we didn't know or we didn't foresee, right? We see that the entity is having challenges or could. We see that good planning in the past has provided a rate stabilization fund. It's not unlimited, as we all know. And so that's kind of my thing I'm trying to lift, right? How fast do we draw down? How is it used? So maybe that's where the policy is, as mentioned by the vice chair. And frankly, as Member Roche said, I agree. We shouldn't claw back unless the situation probably got more dire. But let's think about what we haven't done. So, for example, those employees. I know when we budget, we allocate all the dollars for those employees as if they're fully on board. And if they don't come in at the first of the year, then theoretically we've got a surplus as we add those back in at the end, right? So maybe we're thinking about slowing those down a little bit in this year, just so that we're a bit prudent. And then at the midterm, we could see about how we're doing before they are then coming on. And I could leave that to the executive team, the staff team. But I just want to make sure we're not that we're consciously aware that we're using, one-time money. So respectfully, and I think all the comments are extremely valid. Thank you.
Can I make a couple?
Absolutely,
responses?
yes.
So, first of all, I appreciate the broad feedback because I think it's really well balanced and really hits on all concerns I think we have talked about actively and appreciate the emphasis. We do a 10-year forecast and a 5-year forecast. To be clear, we always maintain that. Right now, because of all of the modeling inputs that have just been updated over the last 2 weeks, is where we don't feel like we have a high degree of confidence in that. In addition to the fact that I never truly have a high degree of confidence in that forecast, to be frank, but we do have it because, of course, we have to have a long-term view of how things will play out, and then we will, as things actualize, then we adjust that and see how that flows through. And there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty into how those will actualize, but with that said, of course, you need to have a long-term view, so you have some ability to plan and you have to make certain assumptions. But right now is at a time where I don't feel confident in our ability to show that, because literally 2 weeks ago, we got all these changes that actually had some pretty meaningful adjustments into the modeling. And so that's my hesitation to make an assumption and put something out there that I don't have a high degree of confidence in. But I also hear the importance of that. So we'll continue to see what we can do to accelerate that for the purpose of the June board meeting. Though I do want to temper expectations. I think give us another week and we're still probably not going to be far enough along to give me a high degree of confidence. But hopefully I can speak to the fact that as we go into the mid-year or presumably earlier than that, I'm happy to, so of course, bring a longer term forecast when it is ready to go, as soon as it's ready to go, and say, hey, we want to provide this for visibility for purposes that we've talked about generally as to longer term planning for reserve allocations, rate stabilization fund allocations, local development fund allocation, all of these things that are important for us and that we want to have good visibility and stability in how we manage. So we will certainly take that as a high priority to bring back. And I'll also just say, I think more of the feedback coalesced around let's see how things actualize throughout the first half of the year. And absolutely, we have assumed some conservative assumptions around our hiring and things like that. So for one thing, I think we will be able to lower some of our expenses as we've been somewhat conservative in some of our estimates. But we naturally do tend to hire more towards the back half. So we will be cautious in terms of how we do our hiring. And we will, of course, be very cautious in terms of our spending, so that as we're approaching the mid-year and as we have firm up our forecast of 26 rates, if it's more concerning or even this concerning, we would bring something back to the board for a mid-year update to make sure we're talking about other levers we may want to pull. And I hope that things look better as we approach the mid-year. And we'll still, of course, update the board, but hopefully we won't be in a position where I feel like we need to recommend additional levers to pull or such.
Okay, great. I am ready to move on. Are my colleagues ready to move on? Okay, so we are going to close out agenda item number 4. We have about 20-ish minutes to do agenda item number 5. This is a topic, it's an informational item. It is a subject that all of us on this committee, I believe, maybe with the exception of our one member who's not in attendance today, we have had this type of presentation before. And I just would note that we do have a whole lot of new board members who, when this comes to the full board, this might be the first time that they're seeing it. So when we make comments, if I could just encourage my colleagues to make comments both about this specific plan, but also if we have any suggestions, whether it's in this meeting or offline to staff about this presentation that is anticipated to come to the full board. Okay, thank you. Turning over to our CFO. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so as you noted, you've seen this in the past. In fact, we had an intro to it at the board meeting a few weeks back, and we did bring it to FAP, so I think some of the newer board members have seen it and asked some questions, but we do want to plan to bring it to the board, the full board in June. We will be seeking approval. But with that, just on the first slide, Adrian, if you can go to it, just really quick. I think you all know most of what this slide has, but IRS regulations enacted in 2003 allow for tax-exempt debt to be issued for prepay of power to serve loads. So the main benefit for AVA is saving on power costs. The cost of funding with tax-exempt debt is lower than the supplier would otherwise get. So they are a taxable entity typically, and their internal funding and their own cost of capital is much higher. So the supplier provides us a discounted power supply for that lower cost of funding. So, next slide, Adrian, sorry. Okay, and I think I talked about the process here. We did issue an RFP in March. The last one was done in 2019. And we did select Morgan Stanley for Prepay 4, and we also looked at maybe changing providers for Prepay 5 and start looking, and I'll kind of highlight some of the reasons why we may want to switch providers and what that is, commodity supply, and also the funding recipient. And there's a few reasons why diversification makes sense. We alluded to those two transactions in April when we came to the board. And we do plan on coming for the approval of prepay 4 with Morgan Stanley and then 5 later this summer with Goldman Sachs. So we're just, kind of kicking off getting the negotiations with that bank together as well. Next slide. Okay, one item we didn't cover in the prior presentation, but very important to AVA, is the green bond designation. Since the energy transition began accelerating a few years ago, a new investment type and class of investors has really grown. Investors such as pension funds and mutual funds that have a focus on climate-related investments and sustainable investments are looking for bonds and proceeds with proceeds that align with their investment values. With the demand taking off in the last 5 to 7 years, that can actually drive pricing benefits sometimes. And so you could have oversubscription to bonds, and that allows you to sell the bonds at a higher price, which lowers the yields and just benefits the issuer flow through to AVA in higher savings for our power supply. We will be engaging a second-party verification entity as we did in the past. We use Kestrel verifiers for the first 3 transactions, and we will do that again as we continue to align ourselves with green investing principles. Next slide. Some of the beneficial elements of prepays. We get to assign existing and future PPAs into a deal structure and then receive a discount on that power. The contract is assigned to a prepaid supplier through an assignment agreement, and then all other terms of the PPA remain unchanged. In the event of a termination of the prepay, the assignment agreement also terminates and the PPA reverts back to its original counterparty. So say, one solar project owner X would then be facing us again instead of that prepaid power supplier. And I'll show you the schematic of the diagram of how the flow of funds works here in a couple of slides. The one caveat I will say is that we would not continue to receive the discount anymore. However, we could look to enter into another prepay if the market conditions were right. And another beneficial element to this is being off balance sheet for both the CCA and for AVA. It's a non-recourse debt is issued. It's not secured by any of our balance sheet or CCFA's balance sheet. It mitigates any risk to us, and those termination events that could occur would just require the bonds be paid off, and then the supplier funding recipient would exit the transaction, and we'd have to face our counterparty again. Next slide. All right, some of the risks that are inherent to these transactions. We have some small out-of-pocket costs that would be at risk. Most of the consultants, legal and financial, and the underwriters are all paid out of bond proceeds, and they just wouldn't get paid if the deal doesn't materialize. However, there are some costs such as seeking that green bond designation, along with some other small out-of-pocket costs for ratings agencies and the like that we would have to pay off if we didn't have a transaction. There is also an opportunity cost risk if the timing isn't optimal, and waiting would have produced higher savings, and that's just a market timing factor. And you've got multiple CCAs sometimes trying to get into the market at the same time. We don't always get it right. All CCAs may be in the market at an inopportune time and get lower discounts than they would if they would wait 6 months. So you do have some opportunity cost risk just on a timing, the market aspect. And then, AVA losing load in the future, or the inability to sign future PPAs into the deal could create termination events for us, which would then result in the loss of the discount that we had been enjoying. And the last two, political and regulatory risks, I think that comes with operating as a load-serving entity. Tax-exempt space, there's always risk to a change in tax code, and then changes to RPS standards as examples. So maybe we don't have renewable PPAs to offer into the deal down the road. Quite unlikely, but that's just a risk that's out there. Okay. So the next slide, Adrian, I think this is where, I'm going to apologize now. This is very, very dense, but I'll try to walk through it. It's very complex. Essentially, though, the green boxes are AVA and the CCCFA, and show up paying for energy and RECs from an already existing PPA. You see that down in the bottom right corner, the existing PPA. That moves over to the blue box, and they are now facing the prepaid supplier, Morgan Stanley. So AVA assigns the PPA to Morgan Stanley, and they agree to pay the contract price to the energy supplier. CCCFA then issues non-recourse tax-exempt bonds. That's the red arrows going down. And those go to the investor. And those bonds are secured by the contractual rights and transaction cash flows. And the bonds carry the supplier and funding recipient credit ratings, not AVA and not CCCFA. Then
Say that again?
CCCFA, yeah.
Say that again, please. That very last sentence.
The bonds.
Yeah.
They carry the supplier and funding recipient credit ratings. Because they are getting the funding of the bond sale. So in order for the investor to be, made whole, they have to ensure that, or they're basically loaning their money to the funding recipient, not to AVA. So that we are only a off-taker of power in these deals. So if there is a termination event, the funding recipient would need to pay back the borrowed money. That makes sense.
Yep.
So the credit rating doesn't carry, or the credit rating on the bonds does not carry AVA's credit ratings.
First, do one quick highlight just on time to try to leave about 10 minutes for some questions.
Oh, gotcha, okay,
Try to target maybe 5 more minutes on the presentation.
gotcha, okay.
That's my fault. I jammed you up on time.
So through the power supply agreement that AVA executes then, AVA pays the contract price less a discount to CCCFA. And that's determined at the time of the bond sale. So that it's sized to have cash flows provide a discount to AVA throughout the term of the transaction. And all AVA is doing is paying cash flows to the to CCCFA, who then pays to the prepaid supplier on a monthly basis, less of a discount from our original PPA, if that makes sense. And CCCFA is basically using the funds that we're using for power supply to pay interest and principal payments to the bondholders. That makes sense. It's a very complex transaction, but just to highlight, I think, how complex it is. We are still just a power supply off-taker.
Right.
We are not issuing bonds in AVA's name, and our credit is not standing behind the deal.
Okay, so these are the ones we've already entered into.
Yes.
And then the next slide is the ones we're,
Yeah, so I'm gonna just cover this really quickly because really the only thing different on the next slide
Uh-huh.
is that box on the right,
right.
the funding recipient.
Okay.
So the past 3 prepays, we've had a funding recipient that's also Morgan Stanley, who is the prepaid supplier of the power.
Mhm.
Well, in the new transaction structure, Morgan Stanley is going to remain the prepaid supplier of the power, but we're going to have a new funding recipient. If that makes sense. And I'll cover why diversifying makes a lot of sense. But the other thing with this schematic, it's flipped. I think I'm sure the lawyers, sorry, John. The lawyers and the consultants that put this together are probably laughing because it's confusing if you look at it with the other schematic. You just have to flip
It doesn't look like they line up at all, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
you just have to flip them around.
Flip it,
So
okay. Like, look at it in a mirror.
So
Look at the
Ava's on the
second-
left.
Ava's on the left here, we're the project.
Yeah, look at the second slide in a mirror.
Yep. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's go through a couple of these next slides. I'm not going to cover this in much detail here. We did highlight this at the prior board meeting as all the different parties to the transaction. But I want to get the diversification benefits.
Great.
So other CCAs have used the same supplier for almost all prepays. When multiples exist, even for AVA, we've had 3 with Morgan Stanley. As the prepaid energy supply counterparty, there is some risk there, counterparty risk, right? It's no different than having just a commodity supply portfolio that most utilities deal with day in, day out, and having concentration risk. You want to have limits to how much you have exposure to one commodity supplier. So, by diversifying that, we can somewhat limit that risk to something happening to Morgan Stanley. And then these deals go away and we start losing our discount. Likewise, and the next section down, investors seek to diversify their risk and they bid more aggressively when there is a different funding recipient, because that is the ultimate credit risk of these deals. So they will actually bid more aggressively and provide a bigger discount to us if there's a different funding recipient than just Morgan Stanley, because these investors have huge portfolios, but if they have all this exposure to Morgan Stanley bond ratings, they start to shy away. So if we can do some diversifying, and that's what the industry has started to do over the past couple of years. I think if you flip to the next slide, Adrian, I'll show you a little bit here, this diversifying the funding recipient concept. This is a list of potential funding recipients that we may bring, and I do believe we will know, at least for prepay 4, who the prospective funding recipient may be. But if we don't know by that time, we'll probably include this and say this is a short list of who we may have, but want to have a little bit of latitude to go with whoever would provide the best discount. Because again, they are bidding aggressively based on their cost of capital. So if they bid with a higher cost of capital, it makes for a bigger difference from tax exempt rates. So our discount gets larger. So these are all large financial or insurance companies with these ratings. And on the right, you can see a list of recent prepays that have utilized this structure. Both CCAs and public power, such as SMUD and TID, taking advantage of this to get away from Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley credit risk for the investor. And it has actualized into larger discounts. Some, I think, earlier this spring were as big as 15%. And I think with that, let me just jump through one more last slide here, just flip over. And I think you've seen all of these. This is the board package we will bring you of all the documents that AVA signs, most tied, and most importantly, the power supply contract, and then PPA assignments. There also is a custodial agreement with a custodian bank that processes all the cash flows, and then an MOU with Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, and that determines a split of those costs that we can't avoid if a deal doesn't happen. Not very big costs, but there is that.
Okay, great.
With that, let me go ahead and wrap up.
Super. Well, presumably staff is bringing this to us because they think it's a good idea for the agency to contemplate doing a fourth and a fifth of this arrangement that we are somewhat familiar with from numbers 1 through 3. Do we have any questions at this time from my colleagues?
No, I was just going to say, I think the more exposure to this material, the more I might likely to understand it in the future. So thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, I learned something every time I.
Exactly.
Okay, so no questions in the room? We will turn to public comment. Do we have any public comment on this item?
There are no hands raised at this time.
No hands raised. So we're closing public comment. We are bringing this back. Do we have any comments on this informational item at this time? I'm looking at Board Chair Balch.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I appreciate hearing about this. I actually, it's nice to think about the green bonds actually being able to help us with this in light of where we're at. So that's encouraging. I didn't anticipate that. Maybe, had I put a little bit more thought to it. So this could be pretty significant and help us kind of all over the board today for this meeting, aren't we? Yeah, but thank you. I appreciate the presentation. This will be my second or third of these, so yeah, thank you.
Great. Any other comments from our site in Hayward? No. Okay. Vice Chair.
Yeah. So my primary thing is I think I said this at the board meeting. Still want like a little primer. We did this 1 year ago. I think I just want a little less than 30-minute class because I've got some questions. My questions primarily focus on just trying to understand who has what incentives, who has what risks in this. One of the core questions that I'm still grappling with, I think the first time that I thought about this, I thought that it was Ava's tax exempt status that causes this to be advantageous. But from what I'm hearing, it seems like it might be this conduit's tax exempt status.
The conduit is CCCFA, so I want to clarify that they get their tax exempt status because we are tax exempt at AVA, so it is AVA. So they're issuing bonds on our behalf as a conduit issuer, because that way
Yeah,
we
so I
don't,
want to understand that a
yeah,
little
we
bit
just, we
more.
don't have an indenture and we don't want to carry debt on our balance sheet.
I got it. So I want to understand it more. And that's it. I mean, I just really understanding the details more. Where's the risk? And that's far beyond the amount of time that we have here.
Right, and so I'm curious if if this body wants to suggest to staff to potentially offer to the full board prior to this agenda item coming, and opt in if you want sort of a 30-minute tutorial, if that is.
We're happy to do that.
Okay.
I was sort of the intention here. I know obviously this was
Okay.
a condensed period, and we did do this review with the FAP. So
Right.
we may just take this as a follow-up and just see if we want to schedule an ad hoc meeting for any interested parties. Say if you want to dig in more, we can do that. Or we can just do it one-on-one, depending on how many folks are interested in doing that, to make sure that we can answer any relevant questions. So yeah, I'm happy to do that.
How do we feel about that approach? Okay, we have
Hi. Thank you for that question. I really like the idea of maybe small groups, so Q&A. I really appreciate and respect staff making themselves available, but to avail yourself for 10 plus people is just not a good use of anyone's time. So maybe we could do a doodle poll and identify a couple of time slots where we could do small groups to avoid a quorum.
I like that suggestion a lot. Because you might not have all board members participate, right? People would self-select into a small group if they want that extra time on this topic. It is a very complicated topic. I guess the only question I would have, and I've previously asked and answered this, but I think it's important to talk about publicly, is because the math works based on AVA's tax exempt status, what happens if AVA loses its tax exempt status?
If AVA loses its tax exempt status, we did not issue the bonds. We could no longer issue bonds, but as long as we are supplying prepaid power, the deal would still stay together. But we couldn't do it, we couldn't do another one.
I realize there's much bigger issues if we lose our tax exempt status, but
There's different ways that
Yeah.
one can lose their tax exempt status. You could technically, it could be a huge retroactive losing of tax exempt status, which would collapse the deal, and the funding
Right.
recipient will have to return the money. We would
Right.
lose the discount, but
Right.
there would be no penalty or a risk otherwise.
Yeah.
And if it was on a go-forward basis, we just couldn't issue it.
right, it's the Harvard question. I just had to ask it.
It.
Okay, are there any more questions or comments at this time? Okay, seeing none, we've done public comment. We're gonna go ahead and close out this agenda item. Really appreciate the opportunity to hear this presentation again. And agenda item number 6 is committee member and staff announcements, including requests to place items on future executive committee agendas. I'm seeing head shakes as opposed to nods. Okay, I'm looking at our CEO. Do you have anything that you want to add?
Nope.
Okay, great. Okay, I don't think we need public comment on that, so I'm gonna go ahead and move on to agenda item number 7, which is adjournment. So thank you all for participating today, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Adrian, I'm gonna